the industrial and organizational psychology movement. First up, we're going to talk about Walter Dill Scott. He grew up in Illinois, and he worked on his family's farm, plowing fields and using the horses to plow the fields. And so while he was doing that, he would stop to give his horses breaks, and he realized that there was a university across the road, which was named Illinois State Normal University. And while he was looking out at this university, he realized he had to stop wasting his time if he wanted to be successful. So at that point, he started to calculate how much time he lost letting the horses rest. And I just think that's an interesting story because he shows the connection between his way of thinking, even at such a young age, and those kind of like same ideas and same questions are principles that we see in industrial psychology. The impact of the World Wars on the development of industrial and organizational psychology. The First World War, the economy kind of became really industrialized, and we saw this increase in the scope, popularity, and growth of IO psychology as a result of that. And some of this is because people like Scott started to evaluate military personnel to understand what their job qualifications are and where they would be best placed. And this kind of showed like that psychology was a useful field and that it could be applied to the real world setting in helping solve problems, whereas it was previously just kind of an experimental psychology where we would learn more information, but it couldn't really be applied to the real world. And then in World War II, psychologists started to develop tests and screenings for people that were joining the military, and this kind of just helped us decide where to put them and what kind of jobs they should do. And there was also an increase in engineering psychology, and this kind of made us start to study the interactions between humans and machines. The Hawthorne studies and organizational issues. So up until this point, a lot of the issues in this field were industrial, and they dealt with job selection and employee placement. But after these studies, we see the field kind of broaden and expand to include organizational issues as well. So in these studies, the Western Electric Company did research on the work conditions and the effect that they had on the efficiency of employees. And this was done at their Hawthorne base, which was based in Illinois. They kind of found that social and psychological workplace factors were much more important than the physical work conditions. So, for example, workers were motivated to know that management cared about them and their boss was interested in them as individuals. That just made them feel better and resulted in better productivity. So these studies kind of led to research on other organizational issues such as leadership, work groups, work climate, communication, and much more. So delving into IO psychology, one of the main contributors was Lillian Gilbreth. She was the first woman to get her PhD in IO psychology from Brown University, and she got this degree alongside her husband, Frank. And while she contributed to the field a lot, she was also very involved in her family, and she did have, I believe, 12 or 13 children who went on to write Cheaper by the Dozen about how she applied IO principles to their household. She was the pioneer in ergonomics, which is the study of how work environments affect someone's efficiency. She did co-write a book with her husband about efficiency, but she wasn't able to put her name on the book because they didn't think that it would sell as well if there was a woman's name attached to it. However, she did go on to publish her own book about management, but it had to go underneath the alias L.M. Gilbreth, so it wasn't as obvious that she was a woman. Hugo Munsterberg is our other main contributor to IO psychology and its development. He studied at Leipzig under Wundt in Germany, and then he eventually came to the United States whenever William James kind of coerced him into coming to teach at Harvard. He kind of flattered him and bribed him into coming over to the United States. He wrote a lot of books and magazine articles about several different applied psychology fields like clinical, industrial, and forensics. In forensics, we see that he did a lot of work in the courtroom and in court cases, and he worked on the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony, crime prevention, and the use of hypnosis to question suspects. And he also kind of studied mental tests that are used to detect guilt in a defendant. He contributed to clinical psych as well. He treated patients in his laboratory instead of the typical clinical setting. And he also helped develop and push for psychotherapy. However, most of his work was in industrial psychology, where he wrote The Psychology and Industrial Efficiency. This book was divided into 3 sections, where he talked about employee selection, employee training, productivity, and working conditions, and also advertising and marketing. Aside from that, he also did some research on personal management, employee motivation, and much more. He also did consulting for for businesses, which is something that we see that is still really prevalent in people that do major in IO psychology. Just looking at a summary, we see that after the World Wars, there was kind of this focus on psychology to help fix problems that we see in the world, which is something that it wasn't always seen as being able to do before. It was seen as kind of an experimental psychology, an academic setting, and not really applicable to the world. But after these sort of developments and the world wars, we see that that isn't the case anymore.